Welcome back to the Four Gardens podcast. I'm Jake Ifshin. The Four Gardens is an approach to cultivate a life of balance, joy, and abundance through focusing on four key areas. On this show, I talk to guests inspiring me in those areas of health, nature connection, creativity, and service. On today's podcast, I'm joined by Sarah Miller. I'm actually here in her apartment today. We're going to be doing a live interview. Sarah's a new friend who has really inspired me around her work with coaching, creativity and design thinking, and her work as a death doula. I'm really excited to learn more about Sarah. Let's jump right in. Thanks for coming on the podcast today, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be here in your beautiful apartment in Southwest DC. To be with you in person is really a pleasure today.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see my apartment being transformed into something really cool and creative. So I'm excited to welcome that energy here. Thanks for bringing it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And it was also my pleasure to meet you at Inner Fusion Festival recently and be a new friend. And
yes.
Learning about you, your work as a death doula is particularly of interest to me, as well as your coaching today. And I want to start with the death doula piece. And I'm not so familiar with the work of death doulas. I'm imagining many of our audience members don't know about what death doulas do or define that role. So I'd love it if you could share about being a death doula.
Yeah. So doulas have been around for centuries. Before there was hospitals or the medical field, there were doulas, midwives, who would help people, women, birth their children, midwife, right? Mm-hmm. And there were also doulas who would help people die. As a society, more recently, we've become accustomed to using birth doulas again, and I see a resurgence of death doulas as well. So a death doula is a spiritual companion to those who are passing and their families. And I like to say that doulas have different superpowers. So some doulas are really interested in the planning stages of passing, maybe legacy work, helping their clients leave a legacy behind, helping them get their affairs in order or clean out their homes, everything that kind of comes before death. Other doulas are really interested in the actual process of passing and being with the family, being with the client who is dying actively. We call that holding vigil. So when you're holding vigil, you're basically just holding space for the person who's passing. And during this time, you can do lots of different things. I like to bring in pieces of the person that they love, maybe reading them poetry or books that they love, music that they enjoyed, making sure that there are smells in the room, even like essential oils or candles, whatever it might be, just to make the space a sacred one, to help them leave the world in a sacred way. And then there are doulas who also specialize after death. So these doulas may be support to the families of those who are left behind. They may be helping with cleaning out the house again, working on the estate, any sort of the legalities that come with it. There's lots of different things, right? So every doula, some doulas do the whole thing, some focus on one part of the process, but every doula brings their own set of superpowers to the process of dying.
Thanks for that introduction to the work and overview, and interested too in when does the work start with doulas too, and how do you meet people where they are in their process? Because I'm hearing there's many different roles a doula can play. So how does a doula get started working with a family or someone who's is ill, or how does that often look, that intake?
Yeah, so I always say that working with doulas, the sooner the better. Waiting until somebody's actively dying, there's only so much a doula can intervene and help with. That would probably look like the holding vigil piece. But one of my close friends is in the process of dying. He has stage 4 renal failure. And the way that he's approached death has been super inspiring, because he's just accepted the fact that he's in the process of dying, and that could come in any amount of days, months, or even years. And as part of that, he's gotten all of his affairs in order. He's cleaned out his house. He's created documentation on all of his accounts and the things that need to be done and the phone numbers. He's enlisted executors. He's told people the things that he loves about them before it's time to go. And because of that, he feels more at peace with where he's going. So that I like to pull that story in as inspiration for when to engage a doula, because those are all the types of things that death doulas can help you with. Oftentimes there's a couple places to find doulas. There's NADA, the End of Life Doula Association. They have a directory online. I went to the Conscious Dying Institute. There's also a directory of doulas there, and local hospices. Hospice is, I think sometimes it gets a bit of a bad rap. Hospice is a place where people can go to increase the quality of their life at end of life. A lot of times medical interventions are about improving the quantity of life, but that oftentimes doesn't give focus to the quality of life at end of life. So hospice's focus is to help make people feel the best they can for as long as they can through comfort care and palliative care. So hospices are a great place for people to go to get involved in the early stages of dying as well. And many hospices have connections to doulas as well, or even have vigil staff or support staff within the hospice to help with that process.
What part of being a death doula, and I heard you say that there are many dimensions to this of supporting people and families passing, what part of it is most satisfying to you or meaningful to you that really keeps you passionate about this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, the part of the doula trade that I was really drawn to is the grief work. What I learned through my process of becoming a doula, I learned a lot about the process of grieving and what that looks like and how that shows up in your life. And something very interesting that I think few people acknowledge is that grief is pervasive in every aspect of our life. So grieving isn't just when somebody dies or when you go through a breakup. Grieving, it can be a loss of an identity. It can be going from being single to being in an amazing relationship and grieving a part of your identity that is no longer there as you move forward in your life. It can be anything from, it can be a lot of things. So I think often we don't acknowledge grief for what it is. And when we don't do that, we're not acknowledging a really important part of ourselves. And a part of ourselves that can cause lots of disruptions internally if we don't see that, right? Grief, unrecognized grief can lead to disease. It can lead to anxiety, depression, physical ailments, pain in the body. So the more that we're able to acknowledge when grief is happening and what that looks like and how that shows up in our life, I think the easier time we have. And just also being able to name it and say, what I'm feeling right now is grief. I am feeling grief because I've lost a part of myself, or I lost a job, or I lost an idea of something that I wanted in my life, and that's okay. And how can I best take care of myself in this process?
What are some examples of during the dying process that you hold, or after the dying process, some ways that you create space for grief to move through or to be felt in a healthy way and for others?
Yeah. I'll speak from my experience. For me, as I've lost people in my life, the best ways that I found to process and let that grief move through me is to allow it when it shows up. So a lot of times it's common practice, if you feel like you're going to cry, to kind of stop that or to be stoic in the face of those really tough emotions, which is okay, but it's really important as those emotions come up in your body, especially as people are dying after death, in that experience of end of life, to allow those emotions to come up. And something that I like to share with my clients too, and people that I work with in grief, is that sometimes grief doesn't show up as sadness. Sometimes grief shows up as relief. When somebody who's been sick for a long time dies, and that feeling of relief that they're no longer suffering. It may show up as anger. It can show up as joyful memories. It can show up as, again, sadness as well. So there's lots of different ways that grief can present itself into your life. And the first step is to allow and acknowledge that that's what's happening. I acknowledge that I'm feeling relief right now, that my grandma is no longer in pain.
As part of the death doula work then with a family or individuals to normalize some of those feelings? Because I can imagine if I didn't have that framework that you have, that I might feel guilty around feeling relief. So is some of that kind of talking through what's coming up, your presence, is that a big part of how you bring that to families, is just tuning in with them that way?
Absolutely. A big piece of the doula's work is to educate the families, educate the client on the physical, emotional, and spiritual process of passing. There's lots of different aspects that are surprising to people. For example, at end of life, about a week to 2 weeks before death, the body no longer needs food. It stops needing sustenance to sustain life. That's because the organs are shutting down. And culturally, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this. I know in my family, I grew up, food is love. We want to give food to people we love to make them feel better. And I even experienced this as my grandpa was passing. Like, come on, grandpa, just eat this. Please eat this. It'll be good for you. But in reality, that can actually cause to more discomfort in the body because the body's no longer able to process that food, and it can just kind of sit in the stomach or sit in the digestive tract. So understanding that as death grows nearer, people may not need food as much, may not need water as much, and that's okay. So being able to educate the families on that and let them know that that's a normal part of the process, I think can bring a lot of relief to everybody. And it's also educating them on the spiritual dimensions of dying. It's not uncommon for people to see visions before passing, to see angels or religious figures, past loved ones, to welcome what we call the mystery into the death. It's also not uncommon for people to hold out on dying for a specific person to come, a specific time. I think at one point I read somewhere that January is one of the most popular months to die because it's after the holidays. People hold on for things, and that is something that really fascinates me about end of life. Is there really is this spiritual dimension to when the soul is ready to leave the body that I don't know is often acknowledged in Western medicine. Some of the emotional aspects of dying, like you said, we're talking about is accepting the feelings that come and not feeling guilty or trying not to feel guilty for them. Or if you are feeling guilty, acknowledging that and releasing it. Because all the feelings you feel as people are passing after death years later are all very normal. And that's another thing about grief. Now that I've said it, it doesn't end 6 months after. It doesn't end a day after somebody dies. Grief is a lifelong process. Grief, there's something called re-grieving. So if you lose somebody at a young age or at a certain stage of life, every new stage of life will bring with it a new set of grief. So losing somebody, losing a parent at a young age, when you graduate high school, when you meet the person you're going to marry, when you have your first child, there's a new set of grief that comes with that. And I know from my experience, I think though every time that new situation presents itself, it doesn't get easier, but I think I have become more comfortable with allowing those emotions to come and understanding that this is a normal part of the grieving process as you move through life in different life stages.
Thanks for sharing that. That re-grieving is a new term to me, and I've experienced that. I lost my father when I was 10.
I'm so sorry.
And so I definitely, going through those life changes, surprising, like grief will come up for me. I'm like, wow, even though it's been more than 2 decades since he passed, I'll notice there'll be something will trigger that re-grieving. And I think even knowing that's a thing, even that education you just did with me adds to that idea that helps me normalize that and be like, okay, it's here. I'm feeling this grief again. And so, yeah, I've experienced that. And that's a good example of some doula work in action there.
Absolutely. It's, thank you for sharing that. It's so normal to feel to as you go through new stages of life to feel that again and in different ways and wish that your dad was there. So, I'm glad that you can acknowledge that and I can bring that education to you.
Yeah. Thanks for that right now. And, something I'm definitely curious about learning more about is the dying and grieving process, how to move with these, knowing that it's both noticing how it's both a collective and an individual. Grief is shared and it's individual in a lot of ways, that we grieve in different ways as people. So I think that's something I didn't understand around grief, was that my grief is different than so take the loss of my father. It's different than maybe what my sister or my brother or my mother is feeling around it. So I think too, that normalization, I keep using that word, but that acceptance and that attunement awareness of that my grief is my grief and it's something that I share with these other people too. So thinking about that collective grief too. What are ways that collective grief, you work with that in terms of, it could be families or groups. How does the doula create something for a group that helps them move through, supports them to move through a collective experience of loss.
Yeah, that's a really great point you bring up, Jake, is every person's experience of grief is different, and there's no wrong way to grieve. And something, as a doula and as a coach, that is one of my first and foremost values is meet the client where they are, right? And I think that that is a lesson that can be applied to people who are grieving in family systems, right? Your brothers, your sisters, your family members may not grieve in the way that you deem appropriate, and that's okay, because that's their experience of grief. There's lots of different reactions to grief. There's the people who kind of really give into it and really let themselves feel, and then there's the people who choose the avoidant path and may take longer to process that, or may find different ways to process it. And the first thing to know is there's no wrong way to grieve, other than not grieving or not allowing yourself to. I think something that's really powerful in a collective sense is a ceremony that I went through as part of my doula training. We actually did a grief ritual, and it was this beautiful ceremony where we created a sacred space, and all the doulas in my training were welcomed into this space to sit in a circle. There were kerners, so women who were singing in a way that imitated the sounds of wailing or crying. There was a musician to play beautiful music and surround us with that nice energy. And it was very simple. We set our intention, and we sat in a circle and just waited for somebody's grief to come up. And as that grief came up, the people around the person grieving would move into that support role. And it was absolutely the most stunning experience of my life. I had just lost my mom prior to going to my second round of doula training, and I was carrying so much grief in my body. I was in physical pain. My back hurt, my knees hurt. I felt like I was 80 years old. Just my whole body was in pain. And I remember just wondering, like, what's going on with me? What's happening? Can this all be caused by grief? And I went into the ceremony and I let myself go. I sobbed in a way that I have never sobbed, and wailed and screamed and cried in a way that I've never cried before. And I did it in a beautifully supported environment where I had 6 doulas sitting around me and physically holding me and rocking me and placing their hands on me, and just creating a sacred space for me to process that emotion, to process that feeling of what I was going through. And they did that for me for maybe 40 minutes. And after that, I did it for the people around me, because the energy would shift, and me allowing myself to grieve allowed somebody else to grieve. And it was a really beautiful gift and exchange of energy. And then I got to be the person in the supporting role, and that felt really good. And after that ceremony, I stood up and I had no back pain. I had no pain in my knees. My body felt rejuvenated. So there's really something cathartic and healing about allowing, like I said, coming back to this, allowing those emotions to come up and allowing yourself to, for lack of better words, just lose it and cry and scream and move. That's another activity we did in our doula training, was to throw our bodies around. And I know you've probably done a little bit of this, where you just let out noises and you let that anger out and you let that energy move through your body. And that's a really powerful way to process grief as well. It may be a little uncomfortable to do a grief ceremony, a grief ritual in a family, but I know that's something that a doula could certainly help put together as a way to honor the person who's left and allow and create the space for grief. That's a big part of being a doula, is holding space.
That's an incredible moment of catharsis.
Absolutely.
Experience of catharsis you described there. Really moving to hear, like imagining, just feeling some chills, imagining what the energy was like in that space with everybody sharing that. And beautifully, you're supporting others with that too. And you alluded to your mom's passing, and I know loss has been a big part of your story. And I imagine it's been part of what's brought you. I hear how it brought you towards the doula work. But I'd love for you if you could share some of your story, how you got to being a doula and working with death.
So death has been a very prevalent part of my life for the past 6 years. And my first foray into it was my 21st birthday. I found out that my dad had unexpectedly passed away from a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot. And the way I found out was I had went over to my friend's house with my bottle of wine in tow to celebrate finally turning 21. And I found my mom there. And I saw her face, and I instantly knew something's not right. And she told me, Sarah, your dad passed away. And I remember just falling on the floor in the kitchen, surrounded my girlfriends at the time and my mom, and just sobbing and realizing life's never going to be the same. I just lost my dad. I'm 21 years old. I'm so young, and I'm literally 3 months from graduating college. What does this all mean? And I was catapulted into a role where I ended up becoming the executor of his estate. I had 2 houses to clean out, a woodworking shop, lots of legalities and bureaucracy to deal with, on top of trying to graduate college, on top of trying to find a job, on top of all of the life changes that come with that big phase of life. And it wasn't easy. And at the same time, I was dealing with my mom's illness. She was a drug addict. So there was a lot of things going on for me, a lot of grief happening in my family. But before I was ready to deal with it, I'd been in therapy, but I wasn't quite addressing the grief head on yet. I was kind of, at that point in time, I got really interested into what happens after somebody dies spiritually. Where do they go? What happens to their soul, their spirit? What's the meaning of life? So I read every book, every blog, every article you could possibly read about where do people go. And I taken a job in DC, and about 6 months into that job, my grandpa got diagnosed with pancreas cancer. And I was very close with my grandpa. He watched me every day growing up. He was one of my favorite people. So that was a whole new experience of grief, because I then learned about what it means to pre-grieve a death versus there's an unexpected death, and that really sucks. And then there's the, oh my God, this person's dying. This also really sucks. And I ended up driving home twice a month from DC to Buffalo to spend time with him. And I could not get through one conversation with him without breaking down sobbing for the 8 months that he was graced to live with us with pancreas cancer, which is a very long time. And I always felt really bad about that. Like, oh man, like he's dying and he's holding space for himself, and I can't get through this without crying. And it just so happened that at that point in time, the person who gave his funeral, she's a wonderful woman, was a death doula, like one of the original death doulas. She'd been doing this for 20 or 30 years. And she was telling me about that, and I instantly said, oh my God, what is a death doula? I must find out about this. I need to study this. I want to be a death doula. To which my friends were like, maybe, get through your grandpa's death. It happened 5 minutes ago. And I was like, nope, this is what I want to do. So after his passing, I found a death doula program through the Conscious Dying Institute and enrolled in that. And it was an amazing program, very in-depth. It involved like a 3-day retreat at the beginning, and then a 3-month practicum, and then a 5-day retreat at the end. And as I was in the airport on my way to finish my death doula training, I got a call at 8 a.m. from my grandma's best friend that my mom passed away. She passed away from a heroin overdose, sadly, and that shattered my world. Losing my dad and my grandpa was really hard, but still to this day, like losing my mom has been the hardest experience of my life. We were so close. We were best friends. And it also threw me into this role of becoming the sole caregiver for my grandma, my 80-year-old grandma, when I was 24. So I had to move home to Buffalo and clean out her house and get all of her affairs in order, find a place for her to live in DC, to the point where there wasn't a lot of time to grieve my mom, quite frankly, because there was so much going on, and I was in charge of all of it. I had to grow up really fast. So when I finally got my grandma here, I was able to go finish my doula training, and that's where I had the experience I shared with you of being part of the grief ceremony. And I think why my body was in such disarray, because there was no time to process my mom's death and what that means and what losing somebody to addiction means, which is a whole different kind of grief. A whole different set of emotions and experiences comes with that. So from there, I finally finished my doula certification, and I started doing doula work on a volunteer basis at a local hospice. And I had so many beautiful experiences with that. And I took care of my grandma for 2.5 years through the pandemic. And this past August, I sadly found her in an apartment, passed away on August 18th. So in a matter of I think it's something like 5 years, 11 months, and 9 days or something like this, my entire immediate family passed away. And I'm still kind of reconciling that. It's been about 6 months since my grandma died. I have no siblings, so it's just me who's left. And it's this really, when my grandma passed away, which I knew was inevitable. She was older. I was taking care of her. But it was like this really weird moment of being like, wow, I'm an orphan. Like I'm what's left in the world of my bloodline, of my immediate bloodline. And that was a really interesting experience. What I found through my doula work, though, and what really inspired me and led me to continue down my path of healing was the great teacher of life that death is. Life and death are polarities. One cannot exist without the other, as above, so below. And I think that death is the absolute most beautiful teacher of life. It is what gives life meaning. It is the fact that we will not be here forever, that our time is finite and it could end at literally any moment. That allows life to be such a beautiful experience, and this human experience to be so finite and stunning. So it was in that learning that I found my love, which is of coaching, doing life coaching. But I'm a little bit of a weird life coach because I think a lot of my approach to coaching, a lot of my approach to the world is inspired by the fact that death is always on my mind, that it could end at any moment, and life is far too short to not do things that you love, to not say, I love you, to not see the world, to not understand what your values are and follow them, and most importantly, to not heal yourself so that you can be in a place where you can live your best life. And it's been really powerful work.
Wow, what an inspiration hearing this. And I'm also just want to say sorry for all your loss. Like, send you a lot of condolences, and I hear how beautifully you're working with it. I also want to kind of give you a hug hearing this too. And I can give you a hug after the podcast.
I always welcome hugs.
Yeah, just hearing all the loss you've experienced definitely touches me. And I feel so inspired, though, thinking about the way you work with death, the teacher it's been for you too. This proximity to death seems to have awoken in you more focus on your purpose in life too. Focus on healing. Focus on living a great life, which is such a beautiful way to something for me to learn from in others, I think too, is the way you're doing that. So, I mean, I see you as a model of this in a way, and without wanting to project on you, but I just see you working with that in a very mindful way. So thank you for doing that too. And yeah, I just feel inspired hearing this. And for me in my work, I realized I was unconsciously drawn to, I think maybe for some of these same reasons, to work a lot with elders. We did our gardening programs in assisted living communities, and I worked a lot with preschool children too. I'm also someone not as extreme as you, but drawn to closer to the beginning of life as a doula or an end of life. And I think that was some of the same realization when I reflected back on that. There is a truth of being close to birth and death that I think comes through around what you were talking about, around not taking life for granted, of taking joy seriously, taking growth seriously, taking love and family seriously. These are all lessons like children and elders have for me. And I can see how that's even more intensified as you get into the moment of birth or the moment of death. The closer proximity you get to that, the more life is put in perspective, it sounds like.
Absolutely. You're so close to the vow at the bookends of life.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Kids are so great because they're just unlimited creativity and potential, and they're so tuned in and intuitive with the other world. And it's also fantastic to be present with somebody at the end of life and to hear the lessons they've learned and the reflections upon what matters, right? And I think it's awesome that you've been able to incorporate that into your world of what can I learn from these two, these bookends, right? The beginning and the end, which often are for me, the most exciting parts of a story, right?
They often are. I have to ask now, what are some of those important lessons? And I want to get to your coaching too, because I think that it sounds like you're integrating some of the lessons there. But what are some of the lessons that being close to people, hearing their reflections at the end of life, what did matter to them?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. It's the $1 million question. What I've heard and what I've experienced in my losses is people don't lay on their deathbed and think, oh, I'm so glad that I worked that 80 hours, 90 hours a week. I'm so glad that I was in a relationship that didn't bring me joy, right? I'm so glad about these things that we do to ourselves that don't bring us joy. Life is, when you get to that place, your deathbed, if you are so fortunate to get to your deathbed and not prematurely die, the things that matter are the things that brought you joy, that aligned with your values, that allowed you to live into your purpose and who you are and why you came to the world. On a very practical level, the things that people reflect upon are stories. One of my favorite things to do with people at the end of their life, I'm sure you've experienced this with the elders you worked with, is hear their stories about their kids, about their family, about their friends, about their travels, about the experiences they had. For me, what it's taught me is life is about experiences. It's about the people you love. It's about spending time with them. It's about taking that 5 minutes to make that phone call to that person who you haven't talked to in a while, and telling them that you love them, because you don't know. That might be your last time. And I certainly experienced that 3 times, where I didn't know it was my last time talking to my loved one. And there were things I wanted to tell them that I didn't. So it's created for me a sense of urgency sometimes to express what I'm feeling, to share that. It's also created for me an inability to not live in my purpose. It is soul draining and crushing and so difficult to be part of anything that doesn't make me happy or that isn't aligning with why I was put on this earth. I believe I was put on this earth to help people, to coach them, to be present with them, to hold space for them. And any time that those skills aren't being activated, it's just, I can feel it in my soul, just slowly draining away. So it's a double-edged sword, because it's made certain aspects of life a little more difficult when you're not able to kind of get on board with things that aren't aligning. But it's also made life far more beautiful and I think I've been given this amazing gift of learning all of these lessons before the age of 30. Like, most people don't learn these until the end of their life, and I got to learn them at the beginning. And that is something through my coaching work, through my doula work, that I want to help other people learn, is how to be present, how to align with their values, how to do things that make their life feel exciting. Because you never know.
You never know.
You never know.
You never know. What wisdom to have before 30. Yeah, thanks for naming that.
Yeah.
Just to have that at a young age, to have that awareness around this so early, because that often doesn't come till the end of life. You're right. I witnessed that. People having these awareness, working with people at the end of their life and in the nursing homes and assisted living homes, that they missed out, something they missed in being young, something they wanted to say, someone who got away, living that life without regrets too. It seems to be important that you lived in purpose. So I like that. And I want to take some space now too to talk about the coaching, then talk about how you are taking that wisdom and supporting others right now and what tools you're working with. Yeah, I'd just love to hear about it.
Coaching has been, it's been such a beautiful thing to finally follow. It's something I remember being in business school in college and walking past, the therapy school and being like, oh, I wish I was going to school to be a therapist. A coach is not a therapist. I need to say that. But it is, to me, it's even more exciting than being a therapist, because I get to work in very creative ways that some therapists are constrained in. So For me as a coach, I've trained at the International Neuro-Linguistic Programming Center, the INLP Center, where I've become an NLP master and also a parts work practitioner. And parts work for me, it's a big part of my life and my coaching. It pretty much, after I learned what parts work was, it permeated every conversation, every interaction, every thought I had, because it really revolutionized the way that I relate to the world and how I see myself in the world around me. So that is something that I incorporate a lot into my coaching, is helping people to identify and understand the different parts of themselves. So on a very basic level, I'm sure we've all experienced this, that part of you that wants to get up and go for a run, and that part of you that wants to stay in bed and sleep and be cozy. Yeah?
Yes, I've definitely experienced that today. Yes.
Yes, today, like 5 minutes ago. So that is also a very normal part of the brain, is having different parts of yourself. It's something that our brain does from a young age to help relate to the world. So when you start working with those on a deeper level, it's actually, for me, it's been a really great way to heal from my grief, to heal from my traumas, is to be able to acknowledge the parts of myself that need healing, the parts of myself that are rebelling, the parts of myself that are trying to protect me, and actually have conversations with them. So in parts work, I'll take my client into kind of a light hypnotic trance and welcome whatever parts want to show up to have a conversation. And they'll often show up in somebody's mind's eye as a cartoon, or as a feeling, a sound, a person, a color, whatever it might be, and we get acquainted with that part. So one of my prevalent parts is my perfectionist parts. I think you might be able to relate to that.
Yes.
And being able to understand that every part has a positive intent. My perfection part is trying to help me from failing, or keep me from failing. And it doesn't often have the best way of doing that, right? Getting really obsessive over the alignment of that PowerPoint deck or the alignment of how things go isn't the best way to keep me from failing. But being able to acknowledge what that part's doing and its positive intent, and then redirect that part to say, hey, maybe next time you could just share with me the fear of failure that you're having, and we could work on together how we might address that. So I've done a lot of that work in my grief processing, and especially with inner child healing. There's a lot of inner child healing that happens with my clients, and I've done on myself, and being able to access that inner child, reparent the inner child, give that inner child space to be a child, which a lot of times when we go through traumas in our life, that inner child, that part of you gets stuck in that trauma. And that's where sometimes physical ailments can come in. That's where belief systems that don't serve you can come in, all of these different things. So being able to transform those parts and help them do things differently has been really powerful for me and my clients. It's my favorite type of work to do with them.
So with parts work too, are you, when you're an NLP coach and a parts work coach, are those the two defining systems you're working with too when it comes to coaching, or is there other things you bring too, or is that really the journey you take people on, is those two systems?
I don't like to, I'm not a big, I only work in these systems. I kind of pull from anything and everything I've ever learned. Some other type of work I do a lot of work with the conscious and unconscious mind. I'm currently in training to be a hypnotherapist. And my mentor has taught me, who is a hypnotherapist, has taught me a lot about the practices of it. So some of the other fun things I've done is things like waking dreams. So waking dream is where you take an interesting situation in your life and you repeat it to the coach or to a friend as if it were a dream. So, for example, last night I had a dream that I was sitting in my beautiful DC apartment, and I am talking to this guy named Jake about death and life. And you go on and you tell the story. And at the end of it, you start analyzing it as if it were symbolic of a dream. And you start dissecting how you created this reality. Because one of my deep beliefs is that we all create our own realities, everything about it, even the things we don't like. And a lot of times we create it unconsciously. We don't even know we're creating it. So doing things like waking dreams or hypnotherapy, parts work, helps to access that unconscious part of the mind that's creating the reality that you're living in. So in a waking dream, to kind of finish that loop up, you will analyze it, and a lot of times different parts will show up, right? In a waking dream, you, Jake, would be a part of me. What part of me might you be? You might be the curious part. You might be, the part that's a little more outgoing or whatever it might be. And having a conversation with that part and understanding why I came to this point in time that I did helps to shift unconscious creations and helps to bring the unconscious to the conscious mind so that you can move forward in a way that's more aligned with your purpose in life.
Yeah, I'm noticing the role of storytelling and myth making, and under how we work with the unconscious is a lot related to myth too. If you think about Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell talking about myths and symbols, and I think about this as these different parts work or NLP I've experienced a little bit too, of giving us ways in to the unconscious, which isn't, the conscious is in a way not noticing or is not investigating. Like these are ways of, do you see it this way too, of ways of researching ourselves in a way, or a way of uncovering who we are beyond our ego, I think is another way to put this. Does that resonate for you?
Oh, I love that. I'm going to start using that. Researching. Let's do some research on ourselves. Cause that's exactly what you're doing. Something that I love to talk about is imagination and creativity. We are, as kids, you're so creative and life is everything is infinite and exciting and new and you're curious. And then the world, adults somehow beat that out of you. And that's really sad because imagination and creativity is the language of the subconscious mind. So the subconscious mind can't talk to you in English. It talks to you in pictures. It talks to you in feelings and sounds and smells. And a lot of times we as adults are so quick to say, no, that was just, that's my imagination, whatever. Like, that's not anything that's real. But when you actually take the time to slow down and listen to what your imagination is saying, listen to how your body's feeling, you're really able to access a new level of understanding about yourself. And a lot of my role as a facilitator, as a coach, is to give people the permission to have an imagination, to give people the permission to be creative with their mind and how the different parts of themselves present themselves, or how you interpret the world around you, how you work with myth and symbolism. Because once you're able to kind of step out of that fear and that rigidity of being creative, it opens up a whole new world of understanding that is so rich and beautiful and colorful, and often involves lots of fun cartoons, at least for me. And it's a really interesting way to look at the world. And I think it's surprising to people who haven't done a lot of this work to allow that imagination to come in and allow that to be part of their experience and not judge it.
Yeah, use that word surprise and not judging. Yeah. It seems to be it's been important for me around that. I think putting the judgment to sleep for a while and getting tuned into the surprising creativity inside of all of us, because creativity to me is access through the flow state. We have some other podcasts about this. I'm gonna shout some out at the end, I think. Love here it. For people who are interested in these topics around creativity and parts work, stuff we've already done. So these are things I'm passionate about because we are so powerful. Our unconscious mind does already know the answer a lot of times, and it's ready to generate the new name for the thing we created. It's ready to generate the new lifestyle, strategy, design, the thing we need. The answer is already inside us. So often it really feels like all these different modalities we're talking about are ways of creating space for those other parts, those other voices inside of us to come up and not be suppressed anymore and have their time in the sun.
Absolutely. That is spot on, Jake. And what I love about what you said is exactly what I love about my job as a coach and as a doula. And that's my job isn't to give my client the answers. It's not to tell them what to do. My job is to create the space and use the tools that will allow my client to find the answers within themselves, because everybody has those answers if you are able to slow down and take your judgment hat off and allow yourself to access that state.
I think that's the way, I need that. I definitely look to coaches for that, to hold that space for me. I recommend everybody finding that coach, finding that, maybe it's Sarah. Finding that.
Yes, please.
Reach out to Sarah. Yeah, we'll link her info here too. But find that coach, find that person who can help guide you into yourself and your own answers and not just tell you what to do. I think that's really the magic of coaching, is like people who have abilities to create those pathways for you. And one last piece of you, we've already kind of touched on it here. I wanted to, while we're talking about parts, is the design thinking passion you have too. And just wanted to weave that in a little bit at the end here of what we have some other info on design thinking, but how is that connected to this for you? And maybe just a little bit about your intro, how that's related to your work.
Yeah, I've been working in design thinking and creativity professionally for about 6 years now. And it was kind of like my dipping the toes into, before learning about the subconscious mind and our creative potential, it was a way to access a process that allowed me to access different creative parts of my brain and to ideate and be fun and play and incorporate that into my work. So for those that don't know, design thinking is a process that helps people to be creative, and a lot of times helps executives or people kind of stuck in a stuck state to move forward in using the creative mind. The things that I've really drawn from design thinking is the behaviors. So a lot of the behaviors we teach are like, freshness, empathy, bravery, these types of things that allow us to get out of our normal state of mind. So for example, freshness is listening to a new podcast or going to a new place, watching a TV show you don't normally watch. Empathy is being able to get in the minds of what we get in the minds of our users, or get in the minds of our clients, understand them, meet them where they are. Bravery is being able to put yourself in situations that make you uncomfortable, and to know and trust yourself to get through them. So these behaviors have been really impactful just in my daily life, but also as I've gone through my journey of healing, as I've gone through my journey of being a doula, becoming a coach, working with clients, just remembering the core behaviors we teach in design thinking and the core principles of every person is creative. Every person has a possibility to create, to build, and it's just merely learning how to access that state of creativity, that flow state, and facilitate that for somebody else.
So powerful. Yeah. Going to also mention, we have an episode on this with Zachary Townsmith too, to check that out on Lunar and Solar Thinking. It's his version of design thinking.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna link some stuff below, as well as the positive intent process with Kevin Hauber, for people who want to go dive deeper into this. And of course, Sarah can share resources too.
Absolutely.
That we can include in this too. But what a powerful modality. Definitely much more to say on it. I just want to see if there's anything else. I really love this conversation today. Feeling so inspired right now. I want to see if there's any other question, any other topic you wanted to touch on or share with our audience today before we close.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We really did.
We really covered tons of ground.
You did great.
Thank you. So did you. It made it very comfortable and easy. I'm curious how there was one thing that was interesting to me in our conversation, and that was when you were kind of bridging the gap. You said you lost your father when you were 10, and you have spent a lot of your adult life working with young kids. And I was wondering, do you think there is any sort of healing going on for you in reparenting that 10-year-old who lost their dad and kind of stepping into that role?
Interestingly, I haven't worked with that many 10-year-olds. Actually, A lot of my work was with 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds, which I think they had some really, and younger even, they had some real wisdom for me in medicine I needed at that time. After coming out of school and being in a very academic setting, to get into being in that zone of being a 5-year-old again, I think brought me back to connecting me to gardening, which has became one of my passions up to this day. Got me back really in touch with nature in a lot of ways and my own creativity. So I think I probably learned more from them than they did from me. I do feel like I brought a lot to them too, but I think there's a great exchange we had there with each other. And yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's definitely something I intend to learn more about, is how grief, whether I've processed it or not, has shaped decisions I made in my life or ways of being that I've cultivated. So I think that's a big rabbit hole and well of insight for me to go into in the future. And I feel inspired talking to you about it.
Oh, amazing. Well, I'm excited to accompany you on that journey and hopefully be there to hold space, because grief is one of the greatest teachers of life when we allow ourselves to acknowledge it.
Thank you for naming that. And we've already talked about doing a follow-up to this. I'd be inspired around parts work or grief. So stay tuned for that in the future. That I'd love to reconnect with Sarah Miller on and open myself to some guidance from you. And you are accepting, just for listeners who love this podcast and connecting to you, we'll share your info, but you are accepting new clients now, right? With your coaching. And is there anything else? People can reach you right now through the website. and we'll share your info here, but anything you want to say for people who are interested in working with you?
Yeah, I am accepting new clients, and I'm really excited to work with people who are excited to explore their unconscious mind, to bring the unconscious to the conscious, and really just people who may feel stuck, may not feel their best selves, and facilitating them to get to a place in life that they're excited about. Because again, life is too damn short.
Life's too
not
short.
Be excited about what you're doing and to love the place that you're at. So I'm looking forward to this next phase of life here for me.
I'm looking forward to witnessing it, supporting you as a friend in this, and continuing to share with you in the future. This has really been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm coming off this conversation definitely with some heart opening and some inspiration of where I'm going to be working in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you. Thanks to the listeners too. I really appreciate you listening today to our conversation or watching. That was again my conversation with Sarah Miller here. And do check out all the links below. I mentioned a few videos that'd be really amazing for you to watch if you like this conversation. I mentioned to you before, I might think of some others afterwards too. And I'd love to hear what you think. If you have any questions, leave a comment on this video.